The night sky over Normandy was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it erupted into chaos. Anti-aircraft fire tore through the darkness, tracer rounds stitched the clouds, and American paratroopers fell from the sky, scattered, disoriented, and alone. In that moment, there were no grand speeches, no heroic music, no certainty of survival. Just fear, duty, and men who had trained for years for a night they never truly expected to survive. This was easy company. Not actors, not legends. Real men, dropped behind enemy lines, about to change the course of history forever. More than 2 decades after it first aired, HBO's Band of Brothers remains one of the most powerful war stories ever told on television. Based on historian Stephen Ambrose's book, the series followed Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, from the brutal training grounds of Camp Toccoa to the beaches of Normandy, through the frozen forests of Bastogne, and finally into the heart of Nazi Germany. It was not just a story about battles. It was a story about brotherhood, leadership, fear, endurance, and the quiet cost of war. And while the series used actors and scripted dialogue, the men behind those characters were real, and their lives were often even more extraordinary than what appeared on screen. Time has taken nearly all of them. Many of the soldiers interviewed for the series lived well into the 21st century, but one by one, they passed on. The last living member of Easy Company, Private First Class Bradford Freeman, died in July of 2022, 78 years after D-Day. With his passing, Easy Company became history in its purest form. But their stories remain, and today, we look beyond the screen to the real men who inspired Band of Brothers. At the center of that story stands Richard "Dick" Winters. Born in 1918 in Pennsylvania, Winters did not seek fame, power, or glory. He joined the Army before the United States even entered World War II, drawn by a sense of responsibility rather than ambition. In the series, rumors circulate that Winters might be Amish, but in reality, he was not. What he was, however, was something far rarer, a natural leader. On D-Day, after landing in Normandy and discovering that his commanding officer had been killed, Winters assumed command under fire. With a handful of men and little information, he led the now famous assault on the German artillery battery at Brecourt Manor, a tactical masterpiece still taught at West Point today. Winters would go on to fight in Compton, play a key role in Operation Market Garden, and lead his men through some of the most intense combat of the war. What made him remarkable was not bravado, but restraint. He led from the front, but never wasted lives. He earned the absolute trust of his men, not through fear, but through example. Eventually, he was promoted out of direct combat, something that frustrated him deeply, as he wanted to remain with Easy Company. After the war, Winters returned to a quiet life, working in agricultural manufacturing and living on a farm. He rarely spoke about the war unless asked, and he never saw himself as a hero. Dick Winters died in 2011 at the age of 92. 1 year later, a bronze statue called the Richard D. Winters Leadership Monument was erected in Normandy, not to glorify war, but to honor junior officers who led from the front and never came home. If Winters represented calm leadership, Ronald Speirs represented something else entirely. In Band of Brothers, Speirs appears early as a dangerous rumor, a soldier whispered about in foxholes and barracks. Stories circulated that he executed German prisoners after offering them cigarettes, though the truth behind these rumors remains debated. What is not debated is his courage. During the brutal fighting near Foy, Speirs took command of Easy Company in the middle of chaos. In one of the most shocking moments of the series, he ran straight through enemy lines to reach an isolated platoon, calmly delivered orders, then ran back the same way without being shot. Soldiers who witnessed it in real life were stunned. Audiences still are. The real Ronald Speirs commanded Easy Company through the end of the war. Unlike many of his brothers in arms, he stayed in the Army after 1945. He returned to combat during the Korean War, once again leading men under fire. Later, he was appointed governor of Spandau Prison in Berlin, where high-ranking Nazi war criminals were held. Speirs retired in 1964 as a lieutenant colonel. He died in 2007 at the age of 86. To those who knew him, he was not a monster or a myth, but a soldier shaped by war, capable of terrifying violence and absolute loyalty in equal measure. Lynn Buck Compton was another figure whose life stretched far beyond the battlefield. Before the war, Compton was a gifted athlete, playing both baseball and football at UCLA. That athletic discipline carried over into combat. He was one of Easy Company's key platoon leaders from Camp Toccoa through the Battle of the Bulge. In the series, there is a moment when Compton throws a grenade with incredible precision at a fleeing German soldier. What many don't know is that the real event was even more astonishing. According to members of Easy Company, the grenade actually struck the German in the head before exploding, a feat so unbelievable it was toned down for television. The war took its toll on Compton, physically and psychologically. After Bastogne, he suffered what we would now recognize as combat fatigue. After the war, however, he rebuilt his life in remarkable fashion. He became a police officer, then a lawyer, eventually rising to deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. In that role, he prosecuted Sirhan Sirhan for the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy. Later, Compton was appointed to the California Court of Appeal, where he served until 1990. From paratrooper to judge, Buck Compton's life embodied resilience. He died in 2012 at the age of 90. Few men in Easy Company commanded as much quiet respect as Carwood Lipton. Motivated by the belief that paratroopers were the most elite soldiers in the Army, Lipton joined the Airborne and became an original member of Easy Company at Camp Toccoa. After landing in Normandy, he assumed the role of Company First Sergeant, becoming the backbone of the unit. While officers came and went, Lipton remained a constant presence, steady, calm, and deeply trusted. In the frozen hell of Bastogne, his leadership held men together when morale was collapsing. His performance under fire earned him a battlefield commission, and he was promoted to second lieutenant. Lipton left the Army as a first lieutenant, but his service did not end there. He was one of the veterans interviewed for Band of Brothers, lending his voice and memory to the story that would introduce Easy Company to the world. Tragically, he passed away in December 2001 at the age of 81, just weeks after the series finished airing, never fully knowing how deeply his story would resonate with millions. David Webster's contribution to Easy Company was different, but no less important. A Harvard student before the war, Webster was an unlikely paratrooper. Intelligent, introspective, and often critical, he documented his experiences in extraordinary detail. While he was wounded in combat and missed some of the war's later battles, his writings became one of the primary sources for Stephen Ambrose's research. Without Webster, Band of Brothers as we know it might never have existed. After the war, Webster pursued writing with passion. As mentioned in the series' final narration, he went on to write a book about sharks, titled Myth and Maneater, the story of the shark. His post-war life suggested a man still searching for meaning after surviving something that had defined his youth. In 1961, while on a fishing trip off the coast of California, Webster was lost at sea and presumed dead. He was 39 years old. His body was never recovered, leaving behind a story that ended as mysteriously as it was lived. One of the few true historical errors in Band of Brothers involves Private Albert Blithe. In the series, Blithe overcomes his fear in combat, only to be wounded and later stated to have died in 1948. In reality, this was incorrect. Albert Blithe survived the war. Born in Philadelphia in 1923, he was another Camp Toccoa veteran. After being shot in 1944, he was sent home to recover. But his military career was far from over. Blithe returned to active service and fought again in the Korean War as a paratrooper. He earned both the Bronze Star and the Silver Star for his actions and rose to the rank of Master Sergeant. He remained in the Army until his death in 1967 at the age of 44. While the error in the series was later acknowledged, Blithe's real story stands as a reminder that history is often more complex and sometimes more hopeful than fiction suggests. Easy Company's story is not just about battles won or territory gained. It is about ordinary men placed in extraordinary circumstances. Men who trained in the heat of Georgia, froze in the forests of Belgium, bled in the fields of France, and marched into Germany not knowing if they would ever see home again. They were not perfect. They were scared, exhausted, angry, and human. And that is what makes their story endure. Band of Brothers succeeded because it respected that truth. It did not portray Easy Company as invincible superheroes. but as men bound together by shared suffering and mutual dependence. More than 20 years later, the series still resonates because the values it depicts, leadership, loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood, are timeless. As the last members of Easy Company have now passed into history, their legacy remains, not in statues or medals alone, but in the quiet understanding that freedom is often preserved by those who never seek recognition. Easy Company did their job, survived the unimaginable, and then went home to live their lives. And in doing so, they left behind one of the greatest true stories ever told.